Look, I get it. Who's got enough time to watch this entire iPhone 16 review from some random ginger on the internet? So because most of you are not going to be watching till the end of this video, I'll save you the time. The iPhone 16 lineup, I don't care if it's the Pro Max, the Pro Plus, or whatever, none of them, in my opinion, are worth it. I'm not even going to be like some channels out there that claim that, well, if you have an iPhone 13 or older, then yeah, it's time to upgrade to the 16. That's very brand family. If you want to get invited to more Apple events in the future, sure. You should say like, yeah, this is the use case for the iPhone 16. I can see why people would buy this one. But after using the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the iPhone 16 Pro Max for the last couple weeks, I've come to the conclusion that even if you're on an iPhone 12 or 11 or even older, I'm still gonna recommend all of you buy an iPhone 15 way before you get to an iPhone 16, because this is an S year. This is a small incremental upgrade, and Apple is doing everything they can with their marketing expertise. And don't get me wrong, they do have an incredible marketing budget and marketing team that makes all kinds of things that are not that different feel very different and fresh and new. But after just a couple of hours of using this latest generation iPhone, I could already tell this ain't worth it. Let's begin. In the iOS 18 video, I titled it Change for the Sake of Change, and that's another running theme I feel with the iPhone 16 lineup. There's a lot of things they did that, in my opinion, were not because anyone was really asking for it, or not because it really made the iPhone experience better. It was simply, we have to change it so that people feel like something is different. It's probably the first time on Apple's marketing page that I've seen them brag about thinner borders. So like, yes, when you first get your iPhone and it doesn't have a case on it, it does feel very thin on those borders. It's pretty impressive how they can cram those pixels all the way to the edge, but in your day-to-day usage, you're not noticing that type of thing. And data shows that the vast majority of people get a case for their phone, and that case eats into the total border width anyway. So the materials on the side of the iPhones are the same. You have aluminum on the base models, titanium on the Pros. The dynamic island didn't change. The brightness levels didn't change. The USB-C ports are exactly the same. Transfer speeds, and honestly charging speeds too. There were some people hyping up that there's faster charging now on the iPhone 16s, but in real world tests, when they plugged it into like a 65 watt charge brick, then the iPhone 16 would charge up to a whopping 31 watts, whereas before it only did 25 watts. Yeah, are you really gonna notice that in your day-to-day usage? Especially because now, even though battery life has been improved across the lineup, that means that you need faster wattage to get that battery percentage up quicker. So in the end, it's really not a noticeable improvement in charging speed, and you still have the same number of cameras on the back. The biggest change with the iPhone 16 is, rearranging that camera bump on the back so they support spatial video and spatial photos. But how many of you are rocking Apple Vision Pro, which is kind of needed in order for you to view those spatial photos and videos, which I've taken my fair share and I've watched them on Apple Vision Pro. If I'm being honest, they weren't that immersive. They were 1080p and 30 frames a second, which is, in my opinion, even though it's 3D, far less lifelike than just recording a 2D video that's 4K 60 frames a second. And yeah, I suppose it's pretty cool that you can now record 4K at 120 frames a second, but again, the number of times I do that, far and few between, and I'm recording a lot of videos on my phone, so it's handy. I'm not saying there's zero upgrades, but it's not the kind of thing I think is worth upgrading over. You can get very similar effects just by recording at 4K at 60 and slowing that down. Most social media is optimized for 30 FPS anyway. I'm one of the weirdos that likes 60 frames a second, but in my opinion, not worth upgrading or spending the extra money over an iPhone 15 Pro to get a 16 Pro just for that feature. The camera layout is of course the same, very similar camera bumps, and honestly I was expecting the jump to 48 megapixels on the 16 Pro to be more noticeable. I was really thinking like, oh, finally we're gonna have sensor parity between the main sensor and the ultra wide in order to have that same level of richness and crispness. But even though it's 48 megapixels, it still feels softer. It still feels like there's more noise. It's just straight up not capturing enough light on that ultra-wide sensor to make it just as good as that main sensor, which means most of the time I prefer taking shots with the main sensor because it just feels so much more rich and vibrant. It has more depth. And that ultra-wide lens, you can tell when you're switching between the lenses, just has a very noticeable downgrade in quality the second you switch to it. And it honestly gets quite annoying in my opinion, because that main sensor, as rich and as vibrant as it is, it can't focus on things as close to the sensor as before. So like when my wife was testing it out and doing comparison shots with her old iPhone 10, there would be situations where she'd hold both phones up to a sunflower, and the iPhone 10, in my opinion, actually took the better photo because it could stick with its main sensor, but when you switched over to the 16 Pro Max, the phone is too close to the sunflower, so it does that macro mode thing where it switches to the ultra wide, which is still an objectively worse quality lens. Even though it's 48 megapixels, it's just not capturing as much light, it doesn't have as much depth of field, it doesn't feel as vibrant, and then it's cropping in on top of that because it's not taking advantage of the full 48 megapixels. And besides, when you take a normal photo with the ultra wide lens, it still crops it down to 12 megapixels anyway, unlike the main sensor, which now defaults to 24 megapixels, but that was the case on the iPhone 15 as well. So there is literally side-by-side comparisons where I guess if you're the average consumer, you may not realize it, but you're probably taking a worse overall photo because this phone is having to crop in on an ultra-wide sensor rather than just stick to using the main sensor like your older phones used to. And maybe the iPhone 16 is better at that, but it's still got a macro mode, which means the phone is constantly jumping between, oh, maybe I'm too close to the subject, I should switch to the ultra-wide, which in my opinion just makes the camera experience overall worse. And that brings me to camera control. Oh boy, do we have some thoughts on camera control. So, something I've always loved about Apple is that they're not like first to a technology, right? Like, usually other companies that are more innovative or more cutting edge will roll out a feature like an OLED display or an ultra-wide lens, but by the time Apple gets around to doing it, they're usually the ones that get it right. They figured out how to make it like simple and seamless and intuitive, and they get the user interface and the software implementation better than everyone. That's what I used to love about Apple, but camera control, in my opinion, is the antithesis of everything that I thought Apple stood for, of like, we thought this through, we got it right, and we may not be first to something, but we're the best at implementing a particular feature, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how Apple was okay shipping a phone with camera control. And not even that, they didn't even leave it on just the Pro iPhones. I thought that would have made more sense, like Apple trying to differentiate between the pros and the non-pros. Camera control inherently just feels like something that a pro photographer or videographer would care more about. But no, they added this on the entire iPhone 16 lineup, which I'm sure adds cost and complexity to the manufacturing process. Now, every single case maker has to account for this, and they're adding sapphire glass to it, which is not cheap. Stainless steel around the border, it's indented. It gives taptic feedback when you give a light press, but then it's still a physical button. So now you gotta account for it with water resistance and everything like that. So many design challenges, I'm sure, that came around with camera control, and all for what? A confusing, hard to use button that in my opinion is more likely to ruin your photos. Lots of other people have already pointed this out. Because it's indented, you have to push harder down, you have to be more precise with how you're pushing this button compared to any other button on the iPhone, and because of that, there's more likely to be camera shake. There are more situations now where if you try to take a photo or a selfie or whatever with camera control, you're more likely to shake the phone at the exact moment that the photo is taking place. You're much better off just using a volume button because it's protruding, so you can feel it and click it a lot easier, or just press the photo button on the screen like everybody else. But if that wasn't enough, Apple also had to turn it into this trackpad, which I had a hard time believing back when it was just a rumor, but this year, a lot of the leaks and rumors actually ended up being quite right. Like, yeah, the idea is you swipe back and forth to zoom in and out, but you cannot zoom or have as much control, ironically, with camera control as you can with just zooming in on the regular display. You can do this on older iPhones, of course, as well, but it's much easier and more dynamic and far more flexible to just slowly zoom in and out with your two fingers on the primary display. And then camera control is in this kind of awkward, hard to reach location. Makes you have to hold your phone kind of awkwardly, but in order to activate the zoom, it's not activated right away because they've got more software updates to fine tune it down the road, but you have to lightly press down, not all the way, and then because it's such a small trackpad surface, you can really only inch in on your photos and videos a little bit at a time. And I get that they're trying to emulate this kind of retro camera feel from back in the old days. I've used older camcorders and older DSLRs, okay, but all of those little physical zoom knobs that they had on the top were way better than this because they actually had a protrusion and you could slide and hold that zoom and match the zooming speed as it went in. Whereas this, no, it's like your finger becomes this stupid little inchworm when you're trying to zoom in and out, doesn't give you as much control as the primary display, is more likely to wobble the phone as you're taking photos and videos, and more importantly than all of these features, it's simply not intuitive. I had family visiting from out of town this week, and I also let my sister try this because lots of people came up to me that are outside of the tech community, of course, that are just people in my personal life, like my father-in-law, who was also in town as I was getting the iPhone, and they all asked me like, hey, you got the latest iPhone, how is it, what does it do? And I genuinely had the hardest time ever trying to convey to people like, it's bigger, the screen's bigger than ever before, and they look at it and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that's big, I guess. But then camera control is the go-to, right? Because it's like, well, this is definitely not on your Android phone, and this is definitely not on the previous iPhone. But as soon as you try to hand this thing to anybody who's not a techie person, they have no idea how to use camera control. Like, you hold the phone to them and they'll try to zoom in and out, it doesn't work, and I'm like, no, you have to press lightly on the button, and then they tap it lightly, and I'm like, no, you have to tap but hold the finger down, but don't push too hard because then it'll start taking a photo. But then if you double tap it lightly, that activates other features like the depth effect and the exposure effect, which, you know, you can do on any iPhone much easier and simpler just by tapping the display, swiping up and down on whatever you tapped, or adjusting the depth of field if you select portrait mode. But instead, Apple's trying to bake all of these complex, intricate features into this one little button that has multiple ways of interacting with it, and no matter who in the family I tried to show this feature to, they could not get the hang of it. They were not impressed by it. They couldn't get it to activate or do the things they wanted to do, and that always made them just default to zooming in and out on the primary display, just like every smartphone before, because that's intuitive. Pinch to zoom makes sense. Like, a baby can figure it out. Even if they've never spoken a word in any language, they can be like, oh yeah, I pinch to zoom in and then reverse pinch to zoom out. And I could understand some of these little techie things if this was restricted to just the Pro iPhones, but no, they literally had to give it to the base models as well. Again, because Apple probably knew there's not enough changes, we need to make this feel like a more substantial upgrade. That's why they gave the iPhone 16 lineup so much better colors, is because that was really the headlining feature of the whole iPhone 16 lineup. Do you think everybody's upgrading just so they can have an action button or a camera control button? No, the primary reason so many people are talking about the new iPhone 16s is because, yes, ultramarine is very pretty, but at the end of the day, you're gonna look at that color for a couple minutes and then forget about it or put a case on it, and then you spent all this extra money for an iPhone that really has so many similarities with the iPhone 15 that it's not worth considering, in my opinion. But of course, the big feature, the big reason I was really interested in the 16 Pros was this new audio mix functionality that claimed this has studio-grade microphones now in the iPhone, and I've been very impressed with the studio-grade microphones in my MacBook Pro, but unfortunately, the microphones in the 16 Pro have sounded god-awful. In fact, I cannot tell the difference at all between the 15 Pro and 16 Pros, other than this one software feature that's also been added to the regular iPhone 16s as well, even though Apple claims there's a hardware physical difference between the mics on the 16 Pro and regular 16. I tried recording videos with it, and people noticed. It was quite obvious, especially when you selected the studio mode option. Like, it's really only impressive if you're recording things in a super loud environment, because then it's like, okay, this audio went from unusable to, like, audible. Like, yes, I can hear what the person is saying, but it definitely is no replacement for a designated recording mic. That's why I'm still using my Zoom for audio recording now. But if you try to use the audio mix features for, like, a regular talking head video like this, and you have a sound-controlled environment, I think it is a gross over-marketing term to say these microphones are studio-grade, because...
So if you don't know about Dan Priestley, he's basically one of the most amazing Tesla executives.
It's so dang bad when you compare it to a real microphone, and honestly, if you're in a controlled environment, the best audio setting is still probably the default one, which doesn't even sound that much different from the last generation iPhone, okay? So I think that was grossly overrated, overhyped, and was a complete disappointment, because that was the main reason I was curious about upgrading. And frankly, I know there's a lot of talk about Apple Intelligence, but it's just not out, and I think, similar to all these other features, it's likely being overhyped and over-exaggerated. Siri's still gonna make mistakes, there's still gonna be problems with it, and personally, I don't think you should buy a whole new iPhone based on the promise of maybe one day Apple Intelligence will be really helpful. I mean, be honest with yourself. Most people who are upgrading their whole iPhone just for Apple Intelligence are doing it for that pretty animation where it just lights up the edges of the display. You'll get sick of it after a while. You'll get bored with it and probably go back to not using it all that often because, again, large language models are hard to fine-tune. They're gonna make mistakes left and right, and you can probably do most of what you're looking for in Apple Intelligence just with off-the-App Store apps like ChatGPT or Gemini. So I think it's one of the most overrated, like, over-marketed things in Apple's lineup right now, because the iPhones don't even have it in the first place, and when it is out, it's probably not going to be as great as Apple is saying it's going to be. But another reason I was considering upgrading is Apple claimed that they put better heat sinks in these iPhones so that this year they should handle thermals way better, but literally on the drive back from the Apple store as I was first setting up my phone, I was already getting overheating. Like, it wasn't shutting off, but the display was dimming and it was dropping the refresh rate, and I wasn't even using it as a personal hotspot yet, which I do somewhat regularly if I'm out and about filming things and need to have internet access. And when I used my phone as a continuity camera with my Mac with a MagSafe puck as a charger, you know, just two fairly heat-intensive tasks, it did start overheating and dropping frames after about 90 minutes of use. So even though I'm sure there's some statistics showing that the iPhone 16 can handle heat better than the iPhone 15, but they still can overheat if you push them to their limits. I don't think it's that noticeable of a change. You're still gonna have to be cautious with like some kind of thermals or the heating environment where you're using your iPhone, whether you have a 16 or a 15. So I just say go ahead, save yourself some money, because you can find the iPhone 15s for much cheaper now. That's why Apple's not selling the 15 Pros anymore, because they know they'd be way too good of a deal. But if you're in the market right now and you're willing to spend somewhat of a premium on your next iPhone because you want it to last a while, and let's say you want Apple Intelligence features, or you care about ProMotion, or you want to have the action button, you can find iPhone 15 Pros refurbished and renewed now for about the same price as a base model iPhone 16, and personally I think the 15 Pro is like better in every way. You still got a telephoto lens on there, you get the titanium and the action button, the faster USB-C speeds, you'll get Apple Intelligence whenever that feels ready. So that's probably the one to buy right now if you're in the market. Can't really recommend anything in the iPhone 16 lineup because I think it's just gimmicks on top of gimmicks, and Apple desperately trying to come up with features that's like, yeah, you should upgrade for this though. You want that faster MagSafe charging speed, even though you have to buy all new MagSafe cables, and you have to make sure that the charge brick is big enough to support that faster speed. You're not gonna notice. You're gonna charge it overnight like everybody else. The thinner borders on the 16 series are really only noticeable in side-by-side comparisons, which you're probably never gonna do. The speakers are the same. The IP rating is the same. Front-facing camera, there was literally 0 changes this year. I guess now you get the Tetra Prism, like 5x telephoto on the smaller Pro this year. That's, I guess, cool. I took some photos with the 5x. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not substantially different than the 3x in my opinion, but a lot of YouTubers swear by it and are just like, oh, 5x just like changed the whole world of portrait mode photography. Okay, sure, yeah, I'll give you that. 5x is kind of cool, I guess. But a lot of you are probably wondering, well, Drew, if the iPhone 16 series just straight up does not feel worth it to you, then you must be returning the 16 Pro Max pretty shortly, right? Because the return window is about to end. Well, ordinarily I would, okay? But situations have changed a little bit because, as you guys know, my wife has been looking to upgrade for a while. She's been rocking the iPhone 10. It's been having issues. It's been slowing down for her a lot. You know, the 4G speeds are just not what they used to be because of all the big 3 carriers prioritizing the 5G network. So we knew we were going to be in the market to replace her phone recently, and I bent the rules a little bit. I apologize in advance for this, but for the first time in Tailosive Tech history, this video is sponsored. It feels so weird saying that, but hey, I didn't sign a contract and I'm gonna completely keep everything transparent with you guys, okay? So you remember a few videos ago, I talked about those Taurus MagSafe battery packs, right? They didn't pay me for that video, they just sent me the items. And a lot of people thought that video was sponsored anyway, so that kind of had me second guessing myself. Like, there's all these brands that want to sponsor the channel. I keep saying no for the sake of tech tuber integrity, but then the viewers think it's sponsored anyway, so I was like, what the heck am I doing here? But that company that agreed to send me the MagSafe battery packs really wanted me to try their latest phone cases on the iPhone 16 series. And I was like, okay, that would be nice, but I don't plan on upgrading to the iPhone 16 series. So Taurus, the phone company that has the phone case on my phone currently, and the company that made those MagSafe battery packs, they said, well, what if we paid for your iPhone 16 Pro Max if you feature in your video of the 16 Pro Max the phone cases that we just came out with? And that was a fairly compelling offer, because I know Google's not going to add me to Team Pixel. Apple's not putting me on the nice list, so I'm not getting a free iPhone from Apple. But we were in the market for a new iPhone, and I knew that my wife didn't want to spend too much money on it anyway. She had a limit of like $300. So I knew we were probably going to be stuck with like an iPhone 12 or 13, and I just feel weird buying iPhones in the end of 2024 that still have the Lightning connector. You know, my wife and I travel a lot, and I was kind of getting tired of her having Lightning and me having USB-C. So I really, really wanted my wife to at least upgrade to an iPhone with Type Type-C. It didn't have to be the fanciest iPhone in the world. I just wanted to have the same port so that we could, on a trip, share our chargers together. Same thing in the car, same thing with the charger on the couch. I just wanted more USB-C in my life, and a lot of the phones that I end up using end up in my family's hands. So I was like, you know what? The 16 Pro Max is not worth it, but this company that wants to feature their phone cases, which I think are, you know, acknowledging my bias here, this is a sponsored video, but cheaper than Apple's own cases and age way better. I've already had some real-world drop test experiences with my 16 Pro Taurus case, as well as my 15 Pro Taurus case, which my wife is still using and very much enjoys. It's kind of hard to find phone cases that have this, like, white hard shell design, and I don't know if those little lines on the edge of the phone are for, like, shock resistance or for durability, but they look pretty cool. Most people are impressed by it when I show it to them, and unlike the silicone cases Apple sells for $50, these are a lot more slippery, so they just slide into my pocket easy, but it doesn't slide out of your hand because the chassis is protected with more of like a rubberized texture that's still like smooth but a lot more grippy than the back shell. And of course they have what is mandatory in my opinion on any phone case, because we use our phones so much, and there's many situations where I'm on FaceTime calls where that kickstand is actually very, very useful. So I know a lot of you are probably commenting, Drew, used to be the caseless guy, why are you suddenly like shilling out for a phone case? Well, it's because there's a ton of situations where I need to prop my phone up, like to watch content and my hands are busy in the kitchen, or I'm doing a FaceTime call and I'm moving the phone around, and just having a really convenient way for that phone to prop itself up is just too dang useful. It's too dang helpful, and now I have a hard time going back, which I know what it's like because I had the Taurus case on my 15 Pro and I was using that kickstand everywhere I went, and then when I upgraded to the 16 Pro Max for this review video, I didn't have that kickstand anymore, at least at first. They sent the cases later, but I went back to not having a phone with the kickstand, and I'm like, yeah, these borders are really thin and all, but it's getting really, really annoying, me trying to like mount my phone everywhere I go, and I was tired of the camera bump wobble. So now, just having this built-in kickstand everywhere is pretty darn useful. So the sponsorship from Taurus, by the way, was not some like ungodly amount of money. I probably should have asked for more, but because of my pesky morals, I was just like, I only want enough money to cover the price of the iPhone, because I don't want to be one of those tech YouTubers that turns into the guy that is reliant and dependent on sponsorships. This is a one-time kind of thing. I'm not planning on making every video sponsored, or honestly, maybe even ever doing a sponsored video again, but I wanted my wife to have a newer iPhone, as did you guys. You were commenting about it constantly. So my wife has actually just recently made the switch to my old 15 Pro, and we can talk about her thoughts on it in a future video. And now I'm switched over to the 16 Pro Max, and because I'm running the social media for Telo Trucks, which is based out of the Bay Area, it's just a new job I've gotten in the past year, I'm getting kind of tired and sick of switching phones around. That did probably play into my decision to upgrade to this iPhone, which I still don't think is worth it, but again, if you're trying to understand my rationale, it's because I'm not the one paying for it. The phone case company that wanted their cases featured agreed to pay for the phone, but that's it. No extra money's going in my pocket outside of the cost of the 16 Pro Max. Probably should have bought the more expensive 16 Pro Max, but instead I bought the cheapest one, but that was the one they wanted featured, was the biggest one. But after switching all of my apps over and having to log in to not just my own personal emails and accounts, but now all of my work emails and accounts for Telo, I was like, I don't want to have to switch back to the 15 Pro. It's going to be such a headache. And my wife gifted the iPhone 10 to her younger sister, who was using an iPhone 6. So still an upgrade for her, but musical phones once again in the household. But I think we're done for at least a while. I still would like to review the Pixel phones, but my wife has also made it very clear she do not want me switching over to Android, because she has put so much time and attention into the iOS calendar app, and suddenly that all get thrown out the window if I switch to Android. That doesn't mean I'm not going to review the Pixel phone. I'll probably just have two phones for a while, but do as I say, not as I do, okay? I think everybody should just do what financially makes sense to them, and in our particular situation, we weren't going to get a free phone if we decided to just buy an old iPhone 12 or 13. The Taurus phone case company were only interested in like covering the cost of a 16 Pro Max because this is like their latest phone case design, which I have been wearing ever since it came in the mail, and it is pretty sweet. Like, it feels like a lighter weight ring, and I use it constantly, and it has been sliding around in the car on occasion, and I've dropped it, and I don't notice any signs of wear. It's comfortable, it's lightweight, and my only slight issue with it is it's made my phone so big now that some of my older phone mounts don't even fit anymore. Like, my phone no longer wirelessly charges in the Model 3, but I'm pretty sure that's just an issue with the Model 3 because it's not MagSafe. Like, wireless charging still works with the Taurus phone case on a Qi mount or like any MagSafe accessory. It's just in the car it doesn't charge anymore, but I've noticed that, hey, my phone phone is running a lot cooler than it used to because the wireless chargers in the Tesla just overheated the phone constantly. So that's probably better off, but I appreciate Taurus for being so flexible. They didn't give me a script. They didn't say, you have to talk about these points. They just said, hey, you don't have to sign a contract or anything, but we would like to pay for the phone if you feature our phone cases in your video. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm happy with the phone case. I am using it, as is my wife. She's happy with the designs as well, but I'm sorry. I had a really good track record there for the past, 10 years of not doing a single sponsored video. I caved. A lot of people thought my videos were sponsored even when they weren't, so I felt like, what the heck am I doing? So we're going back to your regularly scheduled unsponsored content after this, but that's why I'm holding on to the 16 Pro Max, even though I have a lot of complaints with it. And if you're spending your own money, then I highly don't recommend upgrading to it. But if you already bought the phone because you're like, no, Drew, you're wrong, well, there's some phone cases you can check out that I'm using personally that I think are pretty great. So thank you once again to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. This is your Alp Sheep here, and I will see you on the next one.